Hey, everybody, this is Bob Goodwin, and welcome to another episode of Career Club LinkedIn Live. First of all, if you're not familiar with Career Club, please check us out at career.club. We're using proven sales and marketing techniques and tools to help people like you find a career that matters to you. And speaking of careers, we all know this is a very tough time. We keep seeing layoffs in the news. And if you're someone who has been affected by a layoff, we've got a gift for you. Please email me at bob@career.club, and we've got something for you to help you in your journey. This is a live event, so please let us know where you might be listening in from. And as we have our conversation, if you've got questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. And then if for whatever reason you need to drop off early and you're worried about missing the rest of the conversation, this broadcast and all of our podcasts are available as a podcast. So wherever you like to download podcasts from, Apple, Spotify, iHeart, Amazon, Google, wherever, all of our episodes are available for listening at a later time. So we would encourage you to do that, as well as share with colleagues who may not be able to make this episode right now. Lastly, I'd like to thank my colleague, Joey Pace, who is the magic behind the scenes that makes all this technology work. So Joey, thank you. And so without further ado, I would like to welcome today's guest, Cristina Marinucci. Cristina, welcome.
Hi, Bob. How are you?
I am doing great. So nice to have you. Thank you.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I was telling you beforehand that you've got quite a following. I think we had almost 310 people register for this particular episode. So you're quite the draw. Thank you.
I sent them all free cookies.
Whatever it takes. Well, maybe we'll kind of use that as a diving off point here in just a second. But your role is the global head of shopper excellence for Mondelez. And we're going to get into that in a minute. But before we do all that, we, as our habit is to get to know you a little bit as a person. So just a few icebreaker questions, if you don't mind.
Of course.
No, cool. So where were you born and raised?
I'm from New York. I was born in Rockland County, so outside the city, and lived there most of my life until I started traveling a bit for work.
Oh, fun. Well, and then where did you go to school? Where'd you go to college?
I went to Manhattan College in the Bronx, and then I got my MBA at NYU.
Oh, well, you are a city girl.
I'm born, true New Yorker.
True. And then just a little bit about your family.
Sure. I live in Pennsylvania now, and I have 3 beautiful daughters, 9, 4, and 3, that keep me very busy.
Oh my God, that's very sweet. That's awesome. And we can see that your global following is here with Mike from Paris and Shahir from Toronto. And Shar from Indonesia. So like I said, you do have quite the global following. And then it's always interesting, just a little bit about your career arc, Cristina.
Yeah, so I'm currently leading, as you said, Global Shopper Excellence, and just about coming up on 2 years here. But previous to this, I was with J&J Consumer for about 6 years, leading their e-commerce insights and analytics for North America. My background is definitely rooted in the FMCG space. I've worked in data and analytics, but I didn't take a linear path to becoming a specialist, I would say, in insights and analytics. It's definitely been rooted there, but I've worked across multiple categories in FMCG, from food and beverage to personal care to wine and spirits, and also held a variety of roles from brand management to category management and sales, and then definitely the insights and analytics roles rooted in shopper. So I think that's really helped me in terms of that varied experience, progress in my career as well.
Well, and I like what you said, and we'll talk about that maybe in sort of the back half of our conversation, but that nonlinear kind of path, and that definitely seems to be, I think you're on trend with that. And as you say, it gives you a lot of perspective that maybe you wouldn't get if you had just sort of progressed from manager to senior manager to director, always like in insights. And then I'm always curious, what do you like to do when you're not at work? Where are we going to find you?
Well, definitely doing a lot of girl squad activities. They're very busy. I used to be a dancer. My daughters all dance and do cheer, so I'm very involved with them there. I love to travel, explore new places, and a big foodie. So always trying like new food and wine festivals and going to new restaurants.
Favorite cuisine type?
Actually, I love Asian cuisine. I could eat it every night. Thai, sushi, You name it, I'm there.
Awesome. Well, we're going to go out to dinner then. It's going to sound like fun. So just in your role, because you've already alluded to, global shopper excellence, do you mind just explaining for folks real quick what all that encompasses?
Yeah. So essentially, it's three parts. So your more traditional shopper insights from a global standpoint, so driving new capabilities and frameworks there, as well as tools to really help elevate the role of shopper insights within Mondelez. We talk about our path to world-class shopper, and we can touch more on that later. And then revenue growth management, insights and analytics. So again, what are those advanced analytics that are going to help progress the organization in that revenue stream? What's the right price pack architecture, pricing and promo analytics? And then digital insights and analytics. So how are we supporting that digital acceleration from our emerging, accelerating to developed markets and giving them the right suite of tools, as well as KPIs to measure our performance there.
There is a lot of tech and data in your job. A lot.
There is.
we're going to talk about some of that here in a minute. And then I can't imagine people don't know, but do you mind just sharing some of the fun brands that you get to work on at Mondelez?
Sure. So Oreo, we have Cadbury, Ritz, Chips Ahoy. Those are more local brands in the U.S. Philadelphia is a global brand. Tate's, Tang, which is that powdered beverage you may remember from your childhood, really big in other markets. Sour Patch Kids. I could go on and on, but hopefully you know a couple of those. They're probably in your pantry.
There's two that I know that I like beyond the ones that you mentioned. One is Freia, the chocolate. Mm-hmm. Yep. So my daughter lives in Norway, and there's a huge Freia sign in downtown Oslo, which is very cool. And then I think another one of the brands is Dime that you guys have, DAIM, and they do a mashup actually with some Freia stuff and to die for chocolate. So highly recommend that. So fun job, fun brands. Let's start kind of just looking at some of these things. So we had talked about this in our earlier conversation, but one of the things that's interesting is you've got a global role, but it gets executed locally. And you kind of talked about that global local dynamic. And I was wondering if you could maybe just start with that.
Yeah. So Mondelez's approach is local first, but not local only. So we do support the local it kind of goes both ways, right? It's very reciprocal where they're feeding into us and we are looking for those common themes, needs, gaps, and then bubbling those up to drive efficiencies and consistency in how we look at those at a global level. And then we're also pushing down and helping to share across those best practices, identify test and learn opportunities, pilot markets, et cetera, from the markets. It really goes both ways, and we are leading with the local markets, but then activating some things, building those efficiencies and new capabilities at a global level.
And then do you guys look at like because I love insights and have been in it for the past 25 years. Do you guys have like segmentation models that you're using or things that help you kind of get some scale of how you think about the shopper more broadly, even though we're executing and kind of starting locally?
Yeah. So on the shopper side, we have BUs. We're organized into different business units. So we kind of approach the local markets from that standpoint. And then we tap them for different areas of expertise. So it's not so much a segmentation because everything we roll out, we are rolling out globally. But as I mentioned, there are different parts of the world that are in different stages of maturity. So definitely on the e-com side, we talk about having emerging markets, accelerating markets, and developed markets. So that brings a different set of needs, from the very basics to more advanced in terms of, activating across different retailer platforms, retail media, our approach to measurement in those areas and correlation modeling. On the shopper side, it's a little bit different because it's more about how we approach our customers there. So we break into like modern trade versus traditional trade markets. And obviously there's a different set of needs there as well.
No, that's very interesting. And you touched on something when you're talking about digital. It's like one of your three pillars, if I can say it that way. Yeah. Our mutual friends, Peter and Shri, the CPG guys, and Shri's favorite word or words is retail media. So could you talk about how that is kind of impacting as that continues to take on greater prominence?
Yeah, well, so I think you can't be in a meeting these days without hearing about retail media or someone else developing another customer launching a retail media platform. And we were just having a global discussion around this last week, that all retail media platforms are not created equal. And, there's a lot of pressure as that becomes a bigger part of our joint business planning conversations and investment plans. But we also need to be driving more onus on the customers to providing transparency in the data, since there is so much competition now, that we just can't be investing everywhere, right? And there are differences between on-site retail media and off-site. So as we think about those on-site investments, those are, more isolated. They're not going to overlap, but those off-site investments, we're essentially potentially buying the same media, driving up the price there, bidding against ourselves. So it's very important that we have transparency there, and also look at where it makes the most sense for our shoppers and the specific objectives we're driving in that market to invest in certain platforms, not all platforms.
Well, I think that's such a great point that you make, because there is a lot of pressure, and it's almost the fragmentation, right? It's just getting more and more and more, and you have to start making thoughtful choices that may not please everyone.
Right.
Because
Exactly.
we want to make the customer happy, and have as much distribution and facings and all the things that are good for your business and hopefully good for theirs. But at the end of the day, you don't have a limitless supply of money to go throw at all these things.
Exactly. And that's the point. And I think we just need to hold them to a higher standard in terms of the data that they're delivering back to us, and, how we're working together to optimize that investment, and also measure that investment, not just within their platforms, but across the various platforms to understand what that optimal investment is holistically.
That's a great point, because they're sort of, as you said, on-site, off-site within the retailer, but then it's like, well, all right, but we have to benchmark this against our other opportunities here, and how does this sort of net out? You brought up a great point, and I'd like to, we're not going to call anybody out per se, but around data transparency, what are the issues from your side, from the manufacturer side, around data transparency? What are people doing well, and what could people be doing better? Again, we don't have to name any retailers by name.
Yeah, of course. Well is full transparency into not just your branded sales, but also category sales and some competitive sales, to understand and provide those benchmarks and an index of performance, and is that good or bad? I think also being able to share some of those norms outside of our core categories. So, we think very much in chocolate, in cookies, biscuits, and candy. But it's wider than that. If we can look at performance for total snacking, even adjacent categories like salty snacks, and even broader across all of grocery or within CPG. I think having some of those benchmarks and norms so that we can evaluate our performance off of those are kind of best in class. And then it becomes a two-way dialogue, right? It's not just a data dump, and we're expected to mine that and come back with insights and share them with them, which they then take, and we don't hear much after. But it's really that partnership and driving to that joint value creation, that we're using this as a starting point to build plans together from that will benefit the growth in our category, and hopefully we'll see a disproportionate growth for our brands.
Well, and so that's probably a good point to transition from, which is creating those growth stories. That when we were prepping for this call, I know that's really important to you, and something that you guys see as a core competency. So I'll open up the can on building great growth stories, and let you pick it up from there.
Yeah, I think building great growth stories is really important, because this is kind of the holy grail, where it has to become a win for the brand, the retailer, and the shopper. And, starting with those human insights, so not just shopper insights on how they're shopping or the channels they're choosing, their missions, but also those consumer insights around the segmentation, right? We all have our internal segmentation models, et cetera, that can be more brand centric. So how do we take all of that maturity models of the markets, et cetera, and start to frame that frame those brand opportunities in larger category growth opportunities, where we're even looking beyond our categories to create these incremental, potentially, occasions. So it's not about a growth story for Oreos specifically, but it's about growing the cookie category through the right levers, right? And we talk about more buyers, more often, spending more, right? So what are those levers we're pulling, and how do we take all these great inputs and knowledge that we have around our consumers and shoppers, synthesize that in a concise way so that we can bring it to our customers and really size those opportunities and those growth spaces for them, and build a plan over, a 3 or so year horizon.
Yeah, and we were very pleased to have Paco Underhill, who you may know. Paco wrote Why We Buy, which is a phenomenal book, and he just published a new one, How We Eat. And he consults a lot with both brands and retailers. And I think that what you're talking about, like, really, I really enjoyed what you're saying, like the kind of this combination of a human insight and a shopper insight.
Yes.
But like that intersection is where the magic is. And so really being able to understand, what is she solving for? What's the need occasion? What's the real context?
Mm-hmm.
And where do your categories and brands fit within, some very key contexts, and that could be online, that could be in store, and then being able to merchandise in that way is really something that you guys do with excellence. And, one of the reasons I was so glad to have you on today.
Yeah, and I think you hit it, right? Like, we need to align both the sales and marketing teams to that framework, right? And it can start with those demand moments, like that can remain at its core, but then layering in those channel dynamics, the shopper missions and behaviors, and even those macro trends that we're seeing. And then it goes from that piecemeal, like this is happening over here in isolation, or pockets of greatness here and there, to more of that common red thread that's really uniting us and changing the conversation, and also moving from like margin to more meaningful customer conversations. So it's a very clear narrative around category growth, and how our brands are going to play to drive that more profitable category growth, and how that benefits all parties involved.
So one of the things that obviously has changed a lot in the pandemic, like so many things accelerated things that were already happening and just went to fifth gear automatically, is you play in a lot of categories that have an impulse quality to them. And when we stopped going to the grocery store and started doing delivery or click and collect, that changed, how we would even have the opportunity to make an impulse purchase. Could you talk to that for a little bit and how you guys think about that?
Yeah, impulse is a top priority for us to continue to drive, and even beyond impulse, it's really those unplanned purchase occasions. And we know that digital commerce presents special barriers to that, challenges, I'll say, as well as opportunities, right? Online tends to be more pre-planned. You're building a basket over the course of a few days, even a week, versus it being that one point in time when you're going up and down the aisles and shopping. There's a less ability to disrupt that occasion through those sensorial elements like sight, smell, touch, in store, right? Through those typical levers, versus online, we don't have those. You're generally speaking, there's a lot of multitasking happening online, and then it's also driving more price transparency. So it's really easy to see how your basket is growing, especially amplified right now by inflationary pressures. So at the end of that purchase, you can very easily see the total, and then start to cherry pick items out of the cart that may be more of a nice to have versus a need to have in terms of that purchase. So certainly, this is something that we think about, and what are those right points of disruption along the journey, right? It doesn't always have to come right at the end at checkout, but what's the right form of communication at the right point in time in that journey, from right when they start, in the middle as they're searching through and adding products, to at the end to like top up or drive some of those forgotten categories or items to their cart. So definitely unique opportunities here. I think it's something we're really leading in terms of thought leadership around the space and have done a ton of work to understand the behaviors. But it's also a mindset change, from our customers' point of view, where there's this like hesitancy to disrupt that journey online versus offline, no hesitancy to put up an additional display or, signage in the aisle. But how do we think about those things online where it's less as a distraction or disruption, but part of the normal way of shopping? And also, I think we need to size it, right? We need to talk about the opportunity for them as well, like what's in it for them, because these are, incremental purchases that can really build up that cart. And we've done a lot of work to understand that omni shopper, and we know they're a more valuable shopper, both in terms of their online purchases, but also their offline purchases versus the offline only shopper. So, it's something we need to crack, and more people are repurchasing from past purchases and list, which again creates a huge challenge to overcome in terms of getting those unplanned or impulse items onto those lists or as part of that final purchase.
No, it's a great point. I remember when I was at Numerator, and we definitely saw that the first brand to win in a category tended to keep winning because online, because of just
the repurchase. And
I'm just do you want to buy this? They're even teeing it up. Do you want to buy this again? You bought this last time. And It's sort of like, we talk about the endless aisle. This is like the most narrow aisle all of a sudden.
Yeah. So we think a lot about extending our categories beyond the categories. So that's why we talk about framing them in more of these snacking occasions, and being able to think about the other items in their cart and how, there may be some of those adjacencies to show up on those PDPs or at other parts in the journey where you might be landing on the promotions tab or, if there's some type of activation around back to school, or a recipe site, ingredients, etc. So how do we think beyond that, and even more upper funnel? So before they even come down to start shopping, how do we extend that communication and that activation strategy to other parts, right? Like social commerce and social media.
Well, you picked up on something that I was going to touch on. So thank you. And this is back to sort of that integration of human insights and shopper insights, but it's also looking at all the channels and all the kind of media places that you can share your message, exactly what you just said. And our friend over at Alpha Diver, Hunter Thurman, talks a lot about, on the one hand, with all the inflationary pressure, there's this everybody's an economist mindset and like, no, must cut costs. It's like, well, not always, because, there's sometimes it's like, I need to treat myself. Like I feel a lot of pressure and there's a lot going on, and between just, everybody gets the same newspaper, so we know everything that's going on. Yeah. But it's like, no, this is like, I'm not going to take this out of the basket. I'm going to add this to the basket because it's a little pleasure that, provides, some emotional, not only just sensory, but emotional relief from everything that's going on. And when you can message those things, like on the right social platforms, when that's the context, that's the mindset that they're in on that particular platform. They're not seeking information like on Pinterest, like, help me curate a bunch of stuff. It's like, I'm exploring, like I'm actually just taking a time out mentally and emotionally. And that's a great place for, a brand that makes me feel good, feel better to go market.
Yeah, 100%. Like Permissible Indulgences. We know there's more at-home consumption. The trade-offs are at a higher level where they're eating out less, they're traveling less. That these discretionary spends are where we see the first cut coming from. But yes, certainly, within grocery, there's definitely some behavioral changes happening. But it's, we got a lot of questions around, do we think a certain channel is going to suffer, like offline, online, like how does that look? And what we're seeing is there is choices in channels, but it's agnostic of online, offline, right? So they might be looking for more of those discount channels. And then like the second tier is, yes, sometimes there are trade-offs in where they're looking for more promotions or the value price brands or even private label. So, you do have to take those into account, but yes, you're 100% right. Like, how can we reframe that conversation around this permissible indulgence? And this is a
Yes.
small treat. This is not, we're talking about saving you the cents and dollars, not, something that's really going to make a significant impact in your overall budget.
Well, this isn't, I can't pay my rent this month because, I bought some Oreos. Right. So if you don't mind, because I want to be a little bit mindful of the time as well. On Career Club and with our LinkedIn Lives, you've been great, and I love this topic. I could go this all way, but we also like to talk career stuff for a while. And you kind of teed it up at the beginning during the introduction that you've had a non-linear career path. Yes. And I just, maybe if you could just expand on that for a couple of minutes and how that came to be.
Yeah. It kind of came to be more organically, I guess, but I definitely started in data. So it was at IRI and at PepsiCo, and that's where I met our good friend, Peter Bond. And from there, just getting that deep understanding of the data and the foundation that has really helped propel me into all other parts of my career. But then, taking risk early on, I went abroad. I worked in Milan in fashion marketing. I did something different just to explore, like left brain, right brain. Came back into more of like a consumer promotions ROI type of role. And then, opportunities present themselves. And I think you need to take every opportunity and assess it for what it's going to add to your career, whether that's lateral or horizontal. So that's when I was offered a promotion to start in a manager role at M&M Mars and Shopper Insights. But then from there, I was starting to get my MBA and really wanted to explore marketing. So I took a lateral move to Reckitt and, saw it from more of that general management perspective, managing the P&L, seeing how all things kind of connect in that marketing framework. So I think just if you think about each experience, it's not always about getting a higher title, right? It's about, am I going to get an experience with a different sector of the business, geographical, right? Like this last move was global versus regional role. So really getting that and adding that to my breadth of experience versus it could be a functional area where you're moving laterally to get that more 360 degree view of the business and that understanding and appreciation, like walking in their shoes, being able to talk from more of that commercial acumen space, because you're not just so niche that you only see your part of it, but you really understand how all the pieces connect together. And then even just within your functional area of moving laterally to get a different perspective. Like even within insights and analytics, there's so many different types of roles there, from the advanced analytics, which I did a short stint in, to the consumer insights side, which I also did a short stint, and then the shopper insights. Again, it's how do you think about all these different things, different methodologies, and what do each of those kind of layer into your overall experience?
So a couple of things I'll pick up on. One is risk taking. So that's right. Like there's no guarantee. You didn't know where you were going to end up in 15 years.
Right.
You didn't know, but there's an element of risk taking, which I think, again, the modern workforce is kind of moving towards this.
Yeah.
You basically engage yourself in a rotational program.
Yeah. Build your own.
You did the DIY rotational program, which is cool. And then I like how you went and got your graduate degree after you'd been out of school for a little bit and decided this is what I want to do and why I want to go do it, instead of, it's just the next thing to go do. Right. It was that part was very intentional. You used the word organic, which is, again, that's sort of, air quotes, reading the room a little bit. Like, well, all right, this is a good boss. I'm going to learn a lot from this person. This is maybe a gap in my career bingo card I need to fill in,
yes.
And to go get that experience. The last thing I'll say, and this may be as important as any of them based on what you're sharing, is learning the real business. And not just being this sort of niche, nerdy person that knows one thing really, really deeply, but doesn't understand where it fits into the context of the business. I was reading an article last week that the reason that data science sometimes is failing at companies is they get people that are very good at models. They have no idea what they're modeling. They don't even know what the business question is, but they're super geeky on the math. Mm-hmm. And so you're getting your MBA, learning the business, taking roles that gave you that more GM kind of view is really cool. We talked about Peter for a minute. We're going to make fun of Peter Bond for a second, but Peter's a mentor to you. And I just in general, how would you talk to people about the importance of mentors, whether you're being mentored or serving as a mentor?
They're super important, right? Because they give you that outside-in perspective. And I would say mentors should typically be outside of your core group and team, right? So you can have that safe space to talk about and also a different perspective. So I think there's different types of mentors, and I've always held a few different types from within your internal organization. Typically, it could be someone in an extended group that maybe you're somewhat connected to, but they don't know the full scope of your work. And that also, the benefit there is you build advocates, right? You start to talk about your work, you understand the different ways of working in different groups. And then you start to build this network internally that knows your name, knows your body of work, and can speak on your behalf. I think a lot of people rely too heavily sometimes on just their manager. Their manager becomes their whole company. But then what happens when that manager leaves or goes into the next role, and all that kind of knowledge and the repertoire you've built up with them kind of leaves with them. So it's important to have those advocates pollinated across different areas of the business. Then I think the external one, so Peter Bond has served that role for me to give you that more, outside in perspective to help you maybe navigate some of those career moves, just bounce off ideas, work related stuff. Even being part of these informal network groups on LinkedIn as you're, tackling something, it's probably not brand new and someone else has had that question before. So it's great to have those more informal relationships established too, or forum to go to. And then I think reverse mentoring is really, really important because people So, senior leaders in the organization to also have a mentor that kind of keeps them grounded, because I think the more you move up the ranks, the less tactical your role gets, the less you become more removed from the day to day and what it really takes to get things done. And sometimes we have an oversimplistic view of, just get it done. Or, what's really happening, what's the pulse of our shoppers and consumers, because we're often not representative of who we're selling to and who we're speaking to. So I think getting some of those cohorts that might be younger or earlier in their career to really help provide that perspective and kind of keep us grounded in the reality of the day-to-day is also important.
And I really like that idea of reverse mentoring. And one of the things that I've heard other guests talk about is a younger person, understanding a social media platform that maybe you just don't experience because it's just not part of your day to day, but is important. You said something that really resonates with me, which is oftentimes we're not our customer, we're not our consumer.
Yes.
And so being able to talk to people who look more like, live the life more like who our consumer is really important. It also, I think, shows a humility. Right, that I can learn something too. Just because I've got the title doesn't mean I've stopped learning.
Exactly. Yeah, I think just being a lifelong learner and being curious and asking the questions and also being honest. As we move up in these roles, we don't necessarily have all the tick marks for the qualifications of everything we're managing that our team may have more expertise in, but asking the questions to learn and absorb, and then also pushing their thinking to other perspectives as well.
So when you're hiring for your team, what are some of the talent or attribute qualities that you look for?
Sure. Definitely. Well, in global, there's a lot of ambiguity, right? We're learning as we go. We're, building new white space opportunities and capabilities. So I think that is really critical, especially for global roles, being comfortable, being uncomfortable and not having all the answers. So, how do we, especially in research, that's not necessarily a skill set where we want all the data before we make a decision. So being a little more comfortable with that. I think being curious, right? So always on this path to learn and absorb, especially with digital commerce. Every day is a new day, and data too. So that's really important. I think collaboration, being able to work with those markets and influence and shape. I am looking for people that have that data background because I think everything builds on top of that in these types of roles. So not a data scientist, but knows enough to be dangerous, has worked with data, is comfortable working with data, can make sense of data. And then I also think that the how, like how they tell that story, their communication skills, being able to be concise, be compelling is also really important in these types of roles.
And when you're interviewing people, these are the things that you're trying to kind of piece out of the conversation?
Yeah. So I usually do a lot of role playing, or I present a hypothetical to them just to see their thinking of how they would approach something, and not the technical answer, but yeah, more that thought process.
Well, that's reaffirming or confirming, whatever the right word is for me, because when we're talking to our clients and we teach them how to tell a STAR story, the traditional definition of a STAR story: situation, task, action, result. And I've replaced the T with thinking, your thought process, because ultimately that's what the client's hiring is, your thought process. The little box inside of here is what they're hiring. And so asking questions that really sort of pull out of you, how would you solve a problem like this is really key.
I love that. I'm actually going to adopt it because I still use the STAR approach too. So I think that is what I'm looking for 100%. And I always say, I want to hear your thinking. Like, I don't expect you to know the answer, but I want to hear how you would approach it. So I love it.
No, very cool. Awesome. And what advice would you give Cristina early in her career based on what you know now?
So I would say I talk a lot about ambition, and I value ambition in others and myself. So I think ambition is everything, but it's nothing without opportunity. And a lot of times people are waiting for that opportunity to come to them. But in my mind, you need to really create those opportunities for yourself. We talked about the do-it-yourself rotational program, going out and getting those advocates in your organization. I think those are all really important. And it links back to showing, right? Show, don't tell. I think a lot of people can tell the story really well, but how do you show it, right? Through how you show up in meetings, the questions you ask, your body of work, those case studies that you're pulling together. I think oftentimes people stay in roles where they're strong and they have a core competency there. So they're really leveraging their strengths, which I do agree that you should leverage your strengths, but you should also follow your passions and get uncomfortable. So if you're in a role and you know how to do 80% or more of it, it's probably time to move into the next role. I think being uncomfortable, not knowing the answers is in those times is when you grow. So it's really important to not just, get into that very comfortable space and be complacent, but really push yourself to get outside that comfort zone.
Well, which is great. I mean, it just gets back to your ambiguity, right? It gets back to curiosity. And I like what you said too about like how you show up at meetings. Like, we talk a lot about behavioral interviewing. Tell me about a time when or the way you did it, kind of projecting what would you do in a situation if. And yet we're always, in one sense, behaviorally interviewing for our job. It's like, how do you show up? Like, what's your attention to detail? Are you paying attention? Are you contributing, in an appropriate way at the appropriate times? There's a million things, but you're right. It's just how you show up says so much about, are you ready to go pursue another opportunity? And the way that you said being proactive and not reactive to opportunity, which clearly ties to the ambition part, like, then go make it happen. Like, if this is what you want, like, go find a way to make it happen.
Right. Raise your hand, speak up. I think, especially as women, we don't always assert ourselves in those ways, but definitely need to lean into that and share your passions, share your interest areas, and also just volunteer, even if it's not something that's being offered. Hey, I want to get more experience in digital. How can I help? Or what can I take on? Or, reach out to those teams. Everyone wants help, more help. We're all resource constrained. So, raise your hand for a stretch project or even a shadowing opportunity. But I definitely think, taking those risks is what's going to make that material difference as you look back. That, if you didn't try, if you didn't ask, then where would you be, right? Those things don't happen on their own. So you don't learn to walk by following the rules, right? You learn by doing and falling and then starting over and over.
Oh my goodness. That's the difference between me and my wife. She is got her MBA in tax accounting. So she is the definition of a rule follower.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, that's got nothing to do with what I'm about. But that's why we get along well. So just last thing, we had talked earlier about teams, and like if you're 80% of being able to do a job, it's probably time to go on. You had told me earlier about the way that job descriptions are written truly are looking for a unicorn. How would you encourage people to not get discouraged, like, oh my gosh, well, I can't jump over the moon, so I guess they don't want me? Yeah. And to have the courage to apply for something. Where's that balance? If I don't have everything, but I've got enough, I think, to be in the game.
I mean, we write that job description for the unicorn, as you said, right? So I think as you look at those things, you want to think about where you do have the skill set. I mean, I would say you want at least probably 50% or so of things you've done that are going to meet that job description. But the other 50 is more about transferable skills and even growing into a role. If you can do everything in the job description and you've done it before, then why are you applying, right? Essentially, because there should be room for growth for the individual as well as for the company. So it's what's the value you're going to bring? And those are things you can find in the job description, like hitting off on a couple of them, your areas of expertise, your background, but then also what's in it for you as the person taking the role, right? There should be a balance there around how this is going to, help you grow into, your future role or develop a skill set that maybe you haven't developed as much, whether that be soft skills or hard skills. So I think you really want to articulate that. Sometimes I recently had an interview where it was very much about what they were going to get from the role and not what they were bringing. So it seemed more of a stretch. So you really want to balance those two. And I think any good, hiring organization, especially Mondelez, we are looking for a balance of the two, where you are bringing something so you can hit the ground running in some areas, but then there's that upskilling for you to learn more in the role and then grow in the role and really stretch the role even beyond what the job description says. So those transferable skills and how you communicate that are going to be key.
And how you communicate that is super important. It's interesting because there's a study, I want to say it's McKinsey, but I might be wrong on that men will apply to a role that they know they're only 60%, and women need one like 80 or 90% to have the confidence to apply for something. So getting back to mentoring, and particularly mentoring younger women and taking chances, taking risks, exactly what you were describing earlier in your own career. It's like there needs to be encouragement to do that, and that it's okay, and to take a little bit more risk than you think you're comfortable with. And the other part that I'd just like to say thank you for is that these interviews and these jobs, they're mutual. This isn't just a one-way street. And it's like, yes, you want the job and you want to be able to do stuff, but what are you going to get out of it too, and how are you growing? Because sometimes I think that the talent acquisition people are so, well, you didn't tick every box. Well, yeah, no, I'm not going to get anything out of this job because I've already done everything that you guys wanted, right? Or you say that you want here. And I think that the position that you took of, but there should be some growth opportunity for here. Why are you applying for this? Is really a great insight.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, it's always good to make those connections, especially if it's something that you feel there's more growth coming out of it. So being able to articulate those transferable skills and hit on a couple of those key things that may be like repeated throughout the job description, that you are covering those bases first and then talking about, the growth opportunity. But yeah, I mean, if you don't swing, you'll never hit the ball. So it's really important to take those risks. And I'm not a baseball person, so take those risks, and life's all about that, right? And taking risks and seeing where it leads us. So I definitely encourage everyone. What's the worst they could say? No, and then you don't get the job anyway, which you wouldn't have got it if you didn't apply. So you're not in the worst place. You can only improve.
You think like a salesperson, Cristina. That's what I said. Well, but you're calling on this person. Well, they're already not buying something from me. So what's the worst that can happen? They keep not buying from me.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
So, hey, listen, I want to be mindful of the time. I know you're very, very busy. I'm so grateful for the time that you spent. The first half of our conversation, I learned a ton about how you integrate both the human and the shopper, and some of the more technical aspects of how you go about what you do. You're obviously very talented in your job. I really enjoyed the second half as well, and just some of the permission and the coaching that you're giving people to get outside of their comfort zone, be comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think that's going to be my LinkedIn post tomorrow. But it's true, and yet it takes some courage to be able to do that. And I think that's just such great insight that you shared, and you're living it, which is especially valuable. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's been really fun.
No, it's so fun. Well, thank you everybody for listening. If you want to hear this conversation again, or you missed some of it, you can always download this podcast, as we said. Tune in next week. We've got Deepak Jose, who leads global analytics for Mars, as it turns out. And then at the end of the month, we've got Band of Sisters. So 3 ladies that grew up at Pepsi. They just wrote a book called You Should Smile More. And it's about gender bias in the workplace by 6 highly, highly successful executive women. And hope folks can make that episode as well. But in the meantime, hope everyone has a great week. And again, Cristina, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Yep.
Bye.